Well, hello and welcome back. This computer should maybe, well, this specific computer probably won't look entirely familiar to you, but the hardware within should be pretty familiar. So, we've got an RX 570, we've got an A320M motherboard, and we have an Athlon 200GE in here, along with 8 gigabytes of G.Skill DDR4 2400. Why I've got this thing back out, this was the computer I've just had hooked up to my TV in my living room. And a coworker urgently needed a birthday gift computer for his 14-year-old who plays a lot of Fortnite and PUBG. So they're on a budget, certainly, and I made mention that I actually had a system on hand that I could sort of rebuild that was just built a couple of months ago for demonstration purposes that I would be happy to sort of parse out and build for him for that purpose. So I'm going to be starting with this. Out of this computer, I'm going to grab probably the solid state drive. If that's a 128, if that's a 256, I'll have to look for my 128 spares. The RX 570, the motherboard, and the RAM. And then I'm actually going to be using this Cooler Master right there. So I'm going to start by just taking a few of these components out. Eventually I will be putting a new system in this shell, so I'm not going to be too invasive with it. I'm going to leave the PSU in here. I've got something a little more budget oriented for him for that. But yeah, this should actually be pretty good for his purposes. I'm just going to take this stuff out, start building it in the new shell, and then we'll throw Windows on it, throw a wireless card in it since he doesn't have Ethernet, and just sort of go from there. So here's the chassis of choice. This is a Cooler Master N200. Pretty budget case. I think this was 45 bucks. What, buddy? It's got USB 3, USB 2. It's actually got a metal front on it. Still has a drive bay, which I love. Obviously the usual typical front I/O. I believe it actually comes with a fan or two inside as well. Judging by the cabling sticking out of the back, it definitely does. And then I've got a TP-Link wireless card, and I've got a Micro Center power spec 430 watt PSU, which should be plenty for the current TDP of this Athlon 200GE and an RX 570, and should give him enough headroom to go to a Ryzen 3 in the future. Yes, it actually has 2 pre-installed fans. Looks like a pair of 140s. That's really, really nice at this price point. So yeah, first things first, I'm going to pull off both sides of the enclosure and get the power supply fitted. Okay, so PSU is in, and I am actually going to install our SSD into this little carrier right in top. And since the label is pretty colorful, I'm going to mount it upside down just like that. So I'm going to screw that thing in. The case did come with a good amount of hardware, as well as some zip ties for cable management, so we will make use of the vast majority of that. The power spec, 430 watts, no frills. It is 80 plus white, so I mean it's still a decent unit. Pretty good build quality, thick steel, black wrapped cables, even though they still have ketchup and mustard. Again, this should be plenty for the system that we're building here. It's a good, honest, budget power supply. We're making no apologies for it. So, yeah, SSD's in. I'm going to screw it in, and then I'm going to feed the power cables into the back, just for some future cable management. And then we will get the I/O shield installed, this bad boy. We'll get the standoffs in the correct place on the backing plate of the chassis. Motherboard and CPU will go in. And if you guys haven't done this before, socketing a CPU, go back to the January build for this system, and I go over all of that, as well as if you're running a 200GE with an A320, you will need to flash the BIOS with an AMD boot kit, which is sitting right behind that RX 570. So yeah, dual core 4-thread processor, 3.1 gigahertz, I think, should be absolutely plenty to handle the horsepower of our RX 570, which is still a year into it, probably the best budget GPU you can buy. So I'm gonna screw that in, get the cables tucked a little bit, and we will get back to it. So I/O shield's in, motherboard's in. Next pieces are going to be I'm gonna do the simple stuff first. So shorten and install the fan connectors from the front and rear case fans onto the appropriate headers on the motherboard that look like that. Once we've done that, I'm gonna go ahead and take the 4-pin EPS plug from the power supply loom, run it behind the motherboard tray out up here, hopefully, and we'll get that plugged in here. Then we'll do the same thing with the 24-pin. And then I will actually take all of the I/O and switches from the back side here, run them underneath the tray around here, and then plug in the USB 3, the USB 2, the front audio, the front controls, and then we'll get to the one SATA device, which will be our SSD, which will also require one SATA power connector. I have to knock this case for cable management. There really isn't any room between the back of the motherboard tray and the door to shove stuff, so I did what I could. But down here it's going to be pretty icky. I left the PCIe out because we'll need it for the RX 570. The SATA cable looks just disgusting, and you know, I could obviously do better, but this shouldn't impede airflow. It should be easy to service, easy to add on to in the future. So next up is just throw in the RX 570, plug in the PCIe power, do a little bit more cable management, and then we are ready to throw Windows on it. Okay, so, oh wow, OBS has been running this entire time. I did actually install the wireless card that I bought, forgot to mention that, but let's see what we get. Nice, good sign. So I'm gonna boot it up. Actually, suppose it would be smart if I threw in the flash drive to boot from. I believe this SSD actually has an install of Windows on it from my own personal ends, so I will have to wipe it. That's not a big deal. It's actually not a terrible little computer for, you know, the cost, so overall pretty happy. It may not be a window case, but you can see heat pipes and little RGB MSI logo in there, which is pretty cool. We are still going with Windows install. Ignore the green, that's because of the Elgato. I don't really know why it does that, but still plugging through. Once Windows is up and installed on it, I'm just gonna make sure everything is hunky-dory, and then check that the wireless card drivers are good to go. Maybe run one round of Windows updates on it, and it should be good. Yeah, I don't know. For peripherals, I'm actually going to use that Combar $22 Otomu Blue 104 key RGB keyboard. Sorry, that's my cat's feeder going off. For mouse, I'm gonna go with this Inland IM250 gaming mouse, which was $7. Who knows? It's got lights on it. It's probably gonna be okay, and you know, it's just for a beginner getting into Fortnite, so he can upgrade all this stuff in the future. But it actually is a nice big mouse. It looks reasonably ergonomical, so we'll give it a go. I've got all the manuals, plates, antennas in here, so hopefully this kid likes it. I'll be curious to see how it actually handles Fortnite. I don't have time for benchmarking tonight, unfortunately, before I get to bring it to him, but this thing should easily be able to pull 1080p, good, very high settings with 60 frames on Fortnite, so heck yeah.